Almost Brothers by Rebel Airway. Copyright 1991 by CTOHP. Jose was getting old. It was about the only thing left to him. He had already gone bald, lost most of his teeth, become fat, so that becoming an old man was no surprise, and seemed to be the natural end of it all. That's what Jose thought, anyway, when he bothered to think, which was not too often. He was married to a dull woman who was also fat and bald and toothless and too stupid to notice any difference between being young and becoming old. Her daily routine, waking up to her husband's farts to fix him coffee, run to the market to argue over the price of lettuce, and return home to prepare lunch, then drag it over to the garage, then run home and do up a load of laundry if it were Thursday, or dust her silly collection of Santa Teresa figurines if it were Tuesday, or especially to chat with her mother for an hour or two across the patio if it were any day of the week, to end the day fixing dinner and then washing up, a routine she had now kept and nourished without the occasional variation of giving birth or raising little ones during the past 39 years, left her numb to such things as growing old. Today, for example, she had found that 2 days before the new year, Maria Carmen, the chicken stand owner in the Mercado Chico, had raised her prices 2 pesetas each egg, and Teresa, Jose's wife, had spent 10 minutes complaining to Maria Luisa, her neighbor, that they would probably end up paying a full 5 more, as Maria Carmen would surely raise her prices again with the new year. Then, after she had returned home from the garage with the dirty plates from Jose's lunch, just as she was finishing placing the 21st Santa Teresa in her space on the shelf after clearing away a week's accumulation of dust, her mother called at her from across the way, and they spent a good hour and a half talking about that radio program that aired at 10:32 every morning, Problems in the Home. Today, there had been a special topic of interest to any overworked alma de casa, and when she heard the topic from her mother, Teresa moaned in disappointment for having missed the program, arguing with Santo, the butcher, about the rancid ham he had sold her 2 days earlier. The topic had been stains, and of special interest was how to rid oneself of those ancient, rust-colored stains from one's delicate underthings. Teresa's mother would have taken notes if she had known how to write, but as she didn't, she had listened carefully and tried to repeat the formula over and over to herself so that she would be able to share it with her daughter. The only problem was that the procedure so resembled the recipe she was following for lentils with sausage, which she prepared every Tuesday for lunch, that, as she explained it later to her daughter, Teresa got the firm and somehow comic impression that she was to cook her panties for 3 days in olive oil with garlic, in order to rid herself of the household nightmare of menstrual blood stains. This was a normal day, and such activity in the first 8 hours, with 6 left to fill with meaningful household tasks, left Teresa listless and incommunicative when Jose came home for supper. They usually ate in the silence created by the evening television programming, then went to bed, where they only slept side by side touching because their combined weight was enough to sink the wool mattress considerably in the center. Jose would awaken somewhere around 7:45 and reach to the bedside table for the glass of water his wife always left for him the night before. He emptied the glass and felt the first gurgling of his digestion catching up with his consciousness. He then opened the small drawer in the same bedside table and pulled out his first cigar of the day. Lighting up, he would begin to feel hungry, would begin to think of food, would begin to salivate, fully stimulating the peristaltic action. The first gaseous delivery would only come with a total relaxation and a slight lifting of the knees. A small introductory puff would be followed by a deep rumbling, the higher notes being within his bowels, the bass section the vibration of his generous cheeks. From there he could roll a little to his left, lifting up on the low side, and shoot his emissions directly at his wife's back, who, through their abrupt regularity and their fetid, fermented lentil and onion and beer and coffee smell, would sense that it was time to get up and make his coffee, his first at least, with his little glass of brandy. She didn't mind not counting brandy as one of his vices, because her mother had shouted at her across the way one day, without warning or pretext, "Brandy is good, because it makes them smell sweeter and easier to tolerate." This unsolicited comment made Teresa wonder if they were audible to the neighbors, then considered it a minor thing to spend time thinking about. Some days she'd just lie in bed, pretending to be asleep throughout the lengthy onslaught of hot air, at first wondering how long he would go on, then learning to associate particular foods with the length of the attack. This was important because she realized that at the first signs of humidity, José would always get up and sit on the stool for a while. If José got up before Teresa, then he'd figure she was leaving a few wasted rust-colored stains on her delicate underthings, and leave her in peace, going to the bar beside the garage for his morning coffee and brandy. If she served lentil soup with a lot of tomato sauce for dinner and oranges for dessert, then within 10 minutes of awakening the following morning, he was heaving out bursts that she could almost perceive as blasts of spray. This meant not only less toleration time, but also less time pretending to be asleep. She wondered if her mother really believed that bit about the brandy. This morning seemed to be one of those particular mornings in which she had no plans of getting out of bed. José was like a stone when faced with interpreting his wife's behavior. Actually, he liked his wife's lentil soup and did not associate it with going to the bar the next morning for his coffee with brandy instead of drinking his wife's marginal coffee and defatted milk. It was cold. They had gotten down to -9 degrees. At this hour the sun had not yet topped the city wall, and so it was only -3 degrees, but José didn't notice. He had been born here and had never lived anywhere else. In the first place, he was naturally immune to the temperatures of midwinter, actually noticed more when it was unnaturally warm, as it had been this Christmas, some 15 degrees, unheard of. In the second place, his vital organs were well protected within a hermetically sealed cholesterol fatty tissue balloon that had continued expanding to put up a better front against the world. As he entered the bar, his belly brushed against the coat of the man who was always sitting at the door. José did not know the man's name. Perhaps he had heard it once or twice, but rarely engaged in any more exchange with him than a good morning snort. Today the man made some remark about the temperature being down where God orders it to be, and José made a semi-polite grunting noise with his eyebrows lifted ironically, which was supposed to mean that he agreed, but was interpreted to having meant that he hadn't noticed and wanted more details. José didn't want to listen to this man this morning, and he found himself more and more distracted as he fixated on the man's rotting front teeth. He broke away abruptly when Antonio, the barman, brought him his coffee and brandy, and as he lit up his second cigar, Pepe came in. Poor little Pepe was feeling particularly mortal this morning. The New Year's holiday meant that he was passing a long weekend off from work, and so was home with only his simpleton wife and his mother-in-law. He actually had to sneak out this morning before the old widow got herself out of bed to check on his only child, a retarded daughter who seemed to not only have inherited her mother's dimness, but her father's twisted frame, as well as her grandmother's stubbornness. Pepe was always outnumbered by women, and felt himself sometimes so soft, so bland, that he knew he really only truly existed when he was at work. A job so dull and routine that he easily forgot what it was he did, and so no one knew where he went every morning, how his day had been, how was work, because his answer would invariably be, "What do I know?" He had married into the family through a sexual accident, a pregnant dimwit whose mother was looking for a husband for herself, but couldn't remarry because she was a good Catholic. Pepe was a good Catholic as well, so stoically accepted his lot with silly good humor. This humor was being put to a test this weekend, though, because Thicely, his mother-in-law's oldest daughter, was home from the convent for a holiday visit. She was being transferred to the homeland, and had swung permission for a 6-month leave. How wonderful! Thistly was going to be with the family for a good long time. There is so much to catch up on. Pepe was glad to see Jose had only just gotten his cigar lit. That would give him a good 25 minutes to relax and chat with the only person he knew who was a good listener. This was in part because Jose was wasted most of the time on the brandy, smoke, cuisine, little liver pills of his daily existence. Moreover, he was a man of no words, who only communicated with his fellows through facial expressions and grunts, having given up vocalization of his thoughts several years earlier, when he had been caught saying something foolish, and was forced to eat his words so indigestible that the next morning he was afraid to light his cigar in bed for fear of an explosion. Today, Pepe had a difficult task, because his mother-in-law had been on his back all last night about his having to ask Jose if Jesus, Pepe's brother-in-law, could bring his car, a beat-up, rusted-out Seat from the end of the Franco era, to the garage to work on the carburetor and change the oil. She, the mother-in-law, had decided that it was too cold for her only son to be fixing the car in the street. He might catch his death. And Jose had a garage. Surely there would be one corner inside where Jesus could tinker around for a few hours one day. It wouldn't hurt for Pepe to ask. What were friends for anyway? Pepe did not want to ask because he knew that Jose detested anyone using his garage for such activities. Jose rented space to people from Madrid with weekend houses here, and rented a few spaces during the week for spending money. All he had to do was sit in his small glassed-in office, drink brandy, smoke cigars, listen to the radio, and watch the entryway. Teresa was always trying to get him to buy himself one of those small portable televisions to watch at work, but Jose disliked television because it always made him feel droopy and ready to fall asleep. Jose liked the radio because he could play it loudly, and he could not get too lost in its images and time warp because he lacked imagination. For Jose, watching the door was more of a distraction than the media could compete with. Jose did not like friends or relatives of friends dismantling their cars in a space that may be open Sunday afternoon, but is surely occupied Monday morning, with the risk any amateur mechanic might have of not getting the car to work once it was put back together. Jose, of course, had never said this in so many words. Pepe had gathered such ideas together from the various expressions Jose made with his throat and his face whenever the subject came up. Pepe ordered a coffee with milk, and climbed up onto the stool next to Jose, who always stood because sitting he would have overhung. In this manner, Pepe's head nearly reached Jose's neck. Pepe did not want to get straight to the point before he had had the chance to down at least one coffee, and Jose had had two. Judging by the early hour, Pepe figured that Jose had not had a coffee at home this morning, so he invited him to another, which was accepted with a cautious grunt. That simple grunt, with a little upward twist of the left eyelid, suddenly made Pepe feel queasy. He wished he could just lie to his mother-in-law, but that would be unquestionably bad behavior. He figured he may as well cut the shit and get the question out and the permission denied. Jose listened attentively, then hummed something, cleared his throat, blew his nose, put sugar in his coffee, hummed again, sucked in his upper lip, tapped the ash off the stubby cigar butt with an equally stubby finger, cleared his throat again, and said simply, yes, but indicated with gestures that it would have to be the next day and good and early. That was all right with Pepe, but it was his brother-in-law who had the car, so Pepe had to jump down from the stool and waddle over to the phone to call his mother-in-law, to tell her to call her son, and have him call Pepe at Jose's garage in about an hour to say yes or no. When Jesus heard the date, he was delighted to say yes, because the next day was New Year's, and he was certainly not looking forward to spending the entire day with his mother and sisters and niece and brother-in-law. This turned out to be Jose's motive for saying yes. Teresa's mother had invited herself to help Teresa with dinner, for which she was of course staying, and Jose needed a good excuse for not being at home, a better excuse than going to the bar to buy some cigarettes or look for the newspaper. So it was all planned and agreed upon. New Year's Day at 7 o'clock, José would be waiting for Pepe to bring Jesus around. The Noche Vieja was a somewhat sacred affair in José's house. It began with vermouth, followed by dinner with wine, followed by cava, followed by coffee with brandy, followed by more wine and cava, culminating at midnight with the ritualistic eating of the 12 grapes. For Teresa, this night was the worst of all the year, because she knew that grapes gave José attacks of flatulence that shook the stones of their house and left piles of mortar dust at the bases of all the walls. José liked grapes, but because his memory was short, and because he never spoke to his wife, he never asked her to serve them. The tradition made them unavoidable this night, though, and so. On New Year's Day, Teresa rose at 6 o'clock and ran to her mother's house across the way to await an end to the eventual bombardment. José did not awaken when his wife rose, only did return to consciousness when he noticed that his underpants were stuck uncomfortably to the insides of his oversized thighs. He sat on the stool some 10 minutes with the bathroom window open until he finally felt he could control himself enough to change his boxer shorts and long johns and head out to the bar and then the garage. He did not notice his wife's absence. He arrived at the garage with what would have been a small stomach cramp for anyone with a small stomach. A cloud of foul-smelling air hovered around him, almost visible, a mixture of his personal gas and smoke from his third cigar. He definitely did not feel well, but was not concerned, because it would not be the first time he had felt this way, and he knew he would not have to do anything other than sit himself in his large office chair, smoke, drink brandy, and make sure that Pepe's brother-in-law finished up before midday, when they were all expected, under threat of excommunication, for dinner with their womenfolk. When José arrived at the garage, he found Pepe and Jesus waiting for him in a once-avocado green Seat four-seater with a dirty shirt sleeve stuffed in the place where a long-lost gas cap had once been. As usual, José kept his opinion to himself, but wondered what exactly was holding the old jalopy together, spit or shit or semen. José opened the big double door and indicated with hand gestures where they should park. The beat-up Seat belched a bluish-black smoke from its exhaust pipe that made José want to let loose his own fumes, but he was afraid of staining his underpants again, could not leave these two alone to go home to change, so tightened the sphincter muscles and felt the air bubble up through his intestines, ending in his stomach. Once these two were installed in that corner over there, he would head for the John. This was where he was when José heard the crashing sound of something dropping a short distance onto the cement. In his nightmares that night, he would imagine that he could hear the crunch of rib bones and the pop of punctured heart membranes, but in the actual moment of the accident he only heard that crash and the deep bellows of his bowels as he spat out the remainder of the previous night's grape skins. He pulled the chain down, pulled his pants up, opened the door to the water closet, and walked around the corner to see just what all the noise was about. The first thing he noticed was the pool of blood, which he thought was oil. He began cursing inwardly, knowing how difficult such was to clean up from the cement floor. He liked to keep the garage clean for his faggot clients from the city, who did not like to stain the soles of their delicate little leather slippers stepping out from their BMWs or Mercedes-Benzes. Pepe was on his knees in this same pool of nearly black liquid, pulling frantically on what appeared to be an arm, and which later turned out to be an arm, the left arm of his now dead brother-in-law, Jesus. José muttered his first complete sentence in 10 years. "Leave it be, he's dead. Let's figure out something to do," and lifted Pepe by the shoulders, nearly dragging him to the office. There he poured each of them a nice, full glass of brandy, and they set themselves to thinking what they might do to escape from this hard spot. Pepe recounted to José how Jesus had scooted under the front of the auto with a wrench in hand to remove the oil filter, As Jesus was pulling on the wrench, the Seat began to dance on its jack. Pepe had told Jesus to take it easy, but Jesus was as stubborn as his mother, as stubborn as the oil filter that had tightened with age and vibration and rust to fuse perpetually to the underside of the car. Jesus pulled with all of his strength, and the car jumped the jack, killing him with less suffering than Jose and Pepe now had to confront. They decided to fake an accident. They lifted the car with the jack that had slipped and pulled Jesus's crushed torso from the space beneath and placed him in the trunk. Pepe, who knew the car better than Jose, drove out into the surrounding countryside, looking through the steering wheel until they had found an appropriate tree standing alone by the road. They put Jesus in the driver's seat, lit the rag hanging out of the gas tank, put the auto in gear, and ran it into the tree, where 2 minutes later it exploded. They walked the 5 kilometers back to town, to dump kitty litter on the blood-stained cement floor, then go to their respective homes just in time for New Year's dinner. Pepe told his mother-in-law that he had waited at the garage until he had decided that Jesus had overslept the appointment. The family received word of the tragic accident in the early afternoon from the state police, and it seemed no one suspected foul play. Jose spent the afternoon in worse than his usual bad temper, ate more than a normal person would have consumed under similar circumstances, and, in the midst of his morning attack of flatulence, died of a perforated ulcer. Teresa realized 2 days after his death that the bed sheets and the back of her nightgown were spotted with rust-colored stains, and cursed herself again for having missed her regular radio program some 3 days earlier.